stand by while NCLA cuts through the noise to signal abuse of administrative power. This is Administrative Static with Mark Chenoweth and John Vecchione.
Welcome to Administrative Static. This is John Vecchione with Mark Chenoweth, and I just want to remind everyone that it is March, and we have our King George III brackets. You can go to our website and vote on the administrator who has the least regard for the Constitution. So go take a look at the website.
There's so many choices, John.
There are many choices, but go take a look and vote your brackets. Now, I am equally excited that we have Jenin Younes here to discuss a very big development in Missouri v. Biden and a win for the plaintiffs in that case. And I'll just give you a brief description. As you know, that is the case whereby our clients in Missouri and Louisiana are suing the federal government for interfering with everyone's First Amendment rights by saying what could and could not be on social media. And the government eventually, this has been going on for a while, but eventually, with a little prodding maybe from the Fifth Circuit, moved to dismiss the case. They said that, okay, if everything in the complaint is true, even if everything in the complaint is true, that doesn't violate the Constitution. You don't have a claim. Dismiss the whole thing. We can do whatever we want with the social media companies. It's just our free speech. It's the government's free speech. And so, Your Honor, dismiss it. And I welcome Jenin Younes to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So what happened?
So the judge denied the motion to dismiss mostly, saying that if the allegations are true, then there is a theory under which the government violated the First Amendment by turning these private companies sort of into its own instruments to censor people. And I guess the nuance here is that if I'm in the government and I call up one of these companies and I say, listen, can you tell me how we can get our message out there faster or higher up on your when you turn on Yahoo News or something? What words should we use? Stuff like that. The government said that was okay, but they tried to make everything that. What did the court focus on that was troubling, and that if true, if proven, because I want to remind, in a motion to dismiss, nobody proves anything. The allegations are there, and but if we prove which allegations do you say, look, this is the stuff that holds the case in and that in fact could violate the First Amendment? So the thing that what the court sort of focused on was the coercive statements rather than the sort of collaborative statements. So the members of the Biden administration and Surgeon General Vivek Murthy have made statements basically threatening the tech companies with regulation or repeal of Section 230. So Section 230 is, for the tech companies, a very important law that protects them from liability for what people say on their platforms. So they've long feared any kind of repeal of that law, because if they can be held responsible for what's said on their platforms, that would, of course, change the nature of social media.
People in the comments section, people say terrible things, right?
Yeah.
They don't want to. And they could be sued for libel, and it could get expensive.
So the court basically said if the companies are operating under these threats or because of these threats, that is state action. The government is basically more or less forcing them to do this.
And why don't we go through? I do think it's important to what agencies were involved, and let's talk about a little and.
We might have to use up the rest of the hour to list all the agencies that were involved in this.
That is true, but I think the core one that the government cared about was Homeland Security. Would you say
that was a big one? Also, CDC and HHS.
Right.
Well, CDC is part of HHS.
And
so for those of our listeners who don't live in the Beltway, can you tell us what those acronyms stand for?
Yeah, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and what HHS?
The Department of Health and Human Services
yeah.
and the Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah.
Janin's new to the Beltway. You've got a little time. So the coercion for CDC and HHS is primarily vaccines and COVID related in this case, right? And that's what we've been focusing on.
Yeah, so there were public threats that members of the administration were making, basically saying, you guys are responsible for vaccine deaths related to COVID because people didn't get the vaccine, because you are stoking vaccine hesitancy by not censoring vaccine information. You'll be held accountable. We're going to look at ways to hold you accountable. And that amounts to threats.
And you're killing people.
You're killing people.
And then for Homeland Security, that's Hunter Biden's laptop and things of that nature.
Although Homeland Security was also involved in some of the COVID stuff. So they even have, memos or emails saying that it's a national security threat for people to question whether masks work. So Homeland Security, and I think one of the things, one of the key points, I think, is that what started off as sort of a understandable national security approach, there was a concern about Russian disinformation or terrorism, national security threats. That's how this started. And then it sort of
morphed a Chinese virus coming in.
Then it sort of morphed into, anybody who questions the government on anything related to these matters should be censored. And I think that sort of illustrates the danger of allowing the government to get involved in this territory in the first place, because they clearly aren't very good at drawing the lines when then you start censoring scientists who say, maybe not everybody needs the vaccine. Maybe natural immunity is just as good, that kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe this was invented in the lab.
Yeah.
And
they didn't like that either.
And the mission creep, you're right about that, the mission creep. And it reminds me a little bit of the idea that on the national security area is that everything's the moral equivalent of war, right? Every topic is the moral equivalent of war. And it is one thing for you to tell, Microsoft or Google or whoever that this is coming from Minsk, and here's how we know it's coming from Minsk, and it's doing this and that and the other thing, and then saying, oh yeah, it's coming from Ohio, but he sounds like someone from Minsk. So the other thing that we found in our deposition that we did in the CDC, talking about that mission creep aspect of this, is that these portals that the government was given to tell, like they got a special portal. Am I using that?
Yeah,
right?
that's
more
right.
technically adept than I am, but yeah. So they had a portal whereby they could tell each of the tech companies, for Twitter, any of them, what their concerns are and what they wanted the tech company to do. And the way these portals were set up, as the testimony went from the CDC person in charge of tech, was that it all started with the census. That they were very concerned that people wouldn't respond to the census. So they wanted to tell them, look, this is what we're doing. Here's how the census works. We don't track anyone when we do the census. The census is important for you to get your representation, all this sort of thing. And they were pushing this message through these portals. And so when COVID broke out, they said to the Census Bureau said to the CDC, hey, we got these portals and we told everybody, what we were doing in the census, and it was very quick and they were very responsive and we got our message out. But as far as I know, the Census Bureau didn't say, and take down all that anti-census stuff, right? We don't have any evidence of that.
No.
But so now this sort of anodyne type device to make sure everyone's counted and that they get their representation in Congress, goes to the CDC, and the CDC starts telling people, say this, say that, don't say the other thing.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, but the point being is this mission creep comes along. Does the opinion do anything about, you used an interesting term, it seemed to me, between the coercive and the cooperative?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so some of the discovery that we got make it look as though the tech companies are sort of cooperating with the government, especially the CDC. There's a lot of
cooperating of their own volition.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, CDC, Carol Crawford, how do you define vaccine hesitancy? How can we better help you accomplish your mission of increasing vaccine uptake? This kind of thing. But I think it's really important to remember that the apparent cooperation occurred after these threats. So when you have, tech employees appearing to be trying to help the government accomplish its mission, but that's after the government has threatened them, I don't think it should be looked at as collaboration. And another point to make is that if it's collaboration, I still think there's a state action theory. I still think that could be considered a First Amendment violation. It's a little bit murkier at that point.
Well, sure. If I'm Bull Connor and I go down to the local store and I say I don't want you serving any of these people, and the store guy says, yeah, I don't want to either, and let's work together on that. I mean, that's still a violation of civil rights. So this is interesting as well, because the other thing about those emails is there is a sort of a sense you get from them that they feel like they're being harassed by the government.
Yeah.
So the cooperation is not like, oh, let's go do this. It's like, oh, they're calling again. Oh, they're telling me this, that, and the other thing, right? You do get that sense.
Well, and what was the one? Thank goodness we had a response or something like that they said.
Yeah. There were some internal emails from Twitter about someone specifically, Alex Berenson, who's sort of a lockdown vaccine skeptic, where they were saying, that he actually acquired that through his own discovery in his lawsuit. The White House had some really tough questions. They're really angry with us. We don't think Berenson violated terms of service, but we're going to have to figure this out. Yeah. And then a couple of weeks later, he's kicked off. And
actually, I think he did. Alex Berenson tweeted to you that he's going to quote this he's going to quote this opinion very quickly. I guess he has some other suit, but anyway, I thought that was pretty funny.
He has the same lawsuit. It's still continuing.
Okay. And so, we're going to continue with this in a moment, but I do think we'll talk about the importance of whether we have any precedent for this or come back. So, thank you very much. Welcome back to Administrative Static. We're here talking with Jenin and Younes, and I before the break, I was saying how, is there any precedent for this in social media and the government as far as a court case goes, to your knowledge?
There's not a lot of precedent, partially because social media is so new, and partially because the government has really never done anything like this. So there are cases we can draw from that are similar. And establish some of the basic principles, but I don't think we have anything directly on point. That's why this decision is so important, I think, where, the judge recognized that if these allegations are true, that would constitute state action.
Right. And we were discussing between the break, what the government has had a response you've seen in the news.
Yeah. So the government has been saying, well, this order violates its own free speech rights, because the government has a right to say what it wants. And if it wants to say from the bully pulpit, you guys have to stop this vaccine information, you better censor it or else, it has that right. And the judge rejected that argument actually explicitly and said, well, the government has some rights to speak, but it can't use those to violate Americans' constitutional rights, First Amendment rights, which is what is going on here.
So, and I guess it would turn on what they said and how they said it. But, one guy does have apparently free speech rights, though, because one guy won, right, on the government side.
Oh,
yeah, President
Biden.
So
I took that to. You guys tell me it's your case, but I read that to mean essentially that you can get the relief you need without going all the way up to President Biden. He doesn't need to be part of this case, so we're gonna not keep him in.
That's correct, and it's something I've always said, because I often don't sue the president in some of these cases because I kind of know where it's going to go. But it is he is in charge of all these agencies, and so they're all on the hook. But in any event, I did think that was funny that he goes, except for Biden, who runs the whole thing, he's out. And
except for the one who said Facebook's killing people.
exactly.
He's off the.
Although he did dismiss those claims without prejudice, so I think he wanted to leave it open, perhaps.
And so the opinion is pretty long.
77 pages.
All right, and it's on.
Well, I was going to say, where can people find that or read that?
Exactly.
On our website, it's posted under State of Missouri versus Biden.
NCLAlegal.org is our website.
And Judge, what's next in this case? Because that was the government's motion. What's our motion?
So we have a preliminary injunction motion sort of on at the same time. It's kind of happening simultaneously. So that will be heard in late May. Argument on this. So the preliminary injunction phase has actually been going on for a while, and that's what a lot of the discovery came out of, was that phase.
Is there anything else on our website people can find if they go there about this case?
Oh, yeah. There are lots of things, actually, but most recently we posted videotape depositions of all of the people who were deposed in this case, including Dr. Fauci and a number of other agency heads.
Yeah. So you can see in the depth, you can see the questions we asked and what they responded to. But as since we mentioned Fauci, there's been it is interesting to me anyway, that there's all of his public statements. And then there's things he said in other lawsuits or other testimony before Congress. And then there's what he said in our deposition. And
then there's what he said on the streets of Anacostia.
Exactly. So I'd like to go into some of that with you because you've followed it more closely than I do. What are some of the discrepancies or takeaways from the Fauci deposition and what he said otherwise in this litigation?
Well, he was telling the public things with certainty that it's clear from his emails he knew were not certain. So one thing I think that's of great interest is the lab leak hypothesis. So he was he was telling the public, oh, this definitely came from a wet market and natural origins, he was exchanging emails with other scientists where they were very concerned that this may have leaked from a lab in Wuhan. And the reason it appears that he was concerned was that he probably gave the green light for the funding for that gain of function research. So may have actually ultimately been responsible for the pandemic itself. So, and then he commissioned a scientific paper to discredit the lab leak hypothesis. So, I mean, this is, in my opinion, pretty nefarious that you have the sort of guy who more or less formulated COVID policy in this country for a couple of years is actually behind the scenes trying to do things to protect his own reputation.
And maybe cover his tracks. Yeah. We don't know that yet, but maybe.
And I think he's got a lot of Pangolians to apologize to. And I think that
are you talking about pangolins?
Yeah, yes.
Okay,
that's it. I'm sorry. I've always used pangolin, but I thought it was a funnier word than bats. So anyway, so there's give us another one, and in his testimony to us, I thought he was very clear on why, although he did allow gain of function funding, he explained scientifically on the record why it couldn't be this one.
Yeah,
and he was vehement about that, and he went through it in great detail, I thought. And I think anyone listening to this should watch that portion of it. If you have any scientific background, I'd really like someone to take a look at that, if that's true or not, because he got animated about that exact issue. So what else? What's another discrepancy?
Well, masks were another one. He was telling friends, or at least a friend, in March and April of 2020 that they didn't work. Well, at the same time, he was telling the public, you should be wearing a mask. You better be wearing a mask. It'll protect you from COVID. So that's another indication to me that he was sort of pushing public health measures for reasons that didn't have to do with his actual beliefs about the science.
And but he is the science.
Well, and keeping other people from disputing those views that he knew weren't true. I mean, it's very nefarious.
And when it comes to masks, I think a lot of people think, well, what's the big deal? Just wear a mask. I mean, first, I have a different opinion about that because I think there should be a high bar before the government can mandate things, especially if you have to wear it on your face. But that aside, as some of our clients have actually pointed out, Dr. Martin Kulldorff, masks can give a false sense of security to vulnerable people. So people who probably should be avoiding exposure to COVID might have relied on masks, gotten COVID, and died or been harmed. So
it became almost like a talisman to keep you safe from evil spirits when it wouldn't happen. But it's almost that kind of primitivism, particularly these cloth masks. And
actually, ironically, Dr. Kulldorff was censored on social media for saying exactly that, that masks provide a false sense of security to vulnerable people.
And you give it, what were other things that are indisputably true that the government wanted off? Because this is something that's really gotten to me. There were things that were true at the time.
Yeah.
Everybody knew they're true, but that they would take off social media and push to get it off. Give us some examples.
Well, one of the most disturbing is there were people who were talking about their own vaccine injuries, and I've actually been in touch with some of them. So there was a woman named Brianne Dressen who's been pretty active. She was in the AstraZeneca vaccine trial, so this is not an anti-vaxxer. She was volunteering to go out there and try to help with this. She suffered a pretty severe neurological injury that will be with her for the rest of her life, most likely. And this was diagnosed as caused by the vaccine by the NIH. So this isn't some
That's the National Institutes for Health. The government in charge of the vaccine.
Where they do the testing for all these things.
Exactly. And she formed support groups, was leading support groups for other vaccine injured people on social media. And those groups were taken down. And we know now the government was exchanging emails with the tech companies saying this kind of thing stokes vaccine hesitancy. We don't care if it's true, take it down. So the fact that, you have the government behind censoring people who were associating with each other to seek comfort for what was, very difficult life circumstances, I think should really shock the conscience of most Americans.
And who were trying to help in developing a vaccine that was protective.
Exactly.
It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. Exactly. And I do think that's the other thing, because I had noticed even before we learned of that, is that I always say this, but it's amazing to me. The FDA makes the pharmaceutical companies put all the revealed side effects of any medicine at all has to be on the label so people can look at it.
Has to be on the ads on TV.
Yes,
I mean, how many times have you heard
And Saturday Night Live even jokes about it, right? Everyone knows this. But if you put the label up on your Twitter feed or something, they would want it taken down.
For the COVID vaccine.
If you put the side effects, known side effects of COVID, and every drug has them. Aspirin, there's no drug in the world that doesn't have a side effect for some people. It's just the way the world works. And to create this climate where you can't say true things, you talk about mission creep, as we were doing earlier. So it's not just first national security from foreigners, then, here in the United States, well, we want our message out. And then it keeps going to, not only do we want our message out, we don't want all these other messages. And now, not even saying they're false, but now we want all this true stuff taken down.
Yeah. I mean, and it's been very bad for public health. I think they thought they couldn't treat the public like adults. And, here's the vaccine. It appears to be pretty safe. We know it hasn't been around that long. Talk to your doctor. Maybe you have natural immunity. Maybe you're young. You don't need it. And, weigh the cost benefit. Instead, they had, they wanted this simple message. Everybody has to get vaccinated. Everybody has to get vaccinated. And that's incredible. That's just so distrust in public health.
Well, and everybody has to get vaccinated because even if you're not worried about you have to be worried about grandma. And then it turns out the vaccine doesn't stop transmission to third parties. So they were and they knew that.
Yeah.
And at the point in time when they knew that, they continued to lie and pretend as though that was the reason you needed
to
get
that. We'll end with your video of Dr. Fauci said that, right? To that poor guy in DC. He was going door to door.
Yeah. Going around they went to what appeared to be a sort of low-income neighborhood to try to get people to get vaccinated. And I think they thought that the people would just go along with whatever they said. And it turned out some of the people were much more educated on the subject than they anticipated.
I was amazed. It was fantastic. Particularly, there was a woman sort of in the doorway who was saying, well, I heard it doesn't actually stop transmission. I mean, she was saying things that were true, and Fauci was correcting her with false information.
That wasn't on the internet. That was in person.
Well, the government had the videotapes, so they just now released them. That's why that's getting out. More censorship, John.
Any final comment?
Yeah, no, I was going to say this sort of shows why it's dangerous to just allow the government to have its own message get across while it's censoring other people.
Yeah, and I thought we all knew that before this happened, but apparently people don't need to learn these. Just need reminders. Be back.
Here's a reminder: do not government.